Hello, everyone. I am the second half of this YouTube channel called Narrative Nightmares that I created with my friend Kaylee about 2 weeks ago. I will be reading a 3-part story. Depending on how long it takes, it may be just the one part or 3 parts. I tend to read kind of fast, so please forgive. To keep introductions relatively short, you can refer to me as Mystic for now. If we get enough of a following, I might reveal who I truly am. Maybe not, I don't know. Try to keep introductions short because I'm not a veteran, not a newbie when it comes to horror narration channels. I've been a big fan since I was in high school, and it's very cool that I'm finally getting a chance to do this now. So without further ado, please join me for the 3-part story called Something Outside the Kitchen Window is Watching Me. Kind of spooky it already is, isn't it? The mind over matter is me. That was the quote that lingered in my mind. I saw it once, on a TV screen during a mental health awareness ad, which played after the show I was absent-mindedly watching had ended. It stayed with me. I pondered how powerful our minds can shape our reality. The thoughts we think, beliefs we share, and our perceptions of reality aren't merely passive, but actively influence how we experience and interact daily. It had me thinking that despite everyone living in the same physical world, billions of individual realities, cultivated by billions of other people, coexist under one shared present. Does that make sense? But what do I know? I was just a college student trying to figure things out, and I still am. Truth be told, I wasn't even sure I was in the right course. So I'm fairly certain that no one should be taking my thoughts seriously about existential views regarding mankind. Brushing off my odd late-night philosophicals, my head shifted to more important and delicious concerns. What to eat for dinner, of course. I thought about ordering Chinese food, but quickly disregarded it, due to the need to save money for my car payment, which I've been paying off since last year. So I settled for the next best thing. The stereotype of all college students, of course, that being ramen noodles. They weren't so bad. Actually, not bad at all. It hit the spot for me. It might not be everyone's ideal hearty meal, but it was good enough for me. Shortly after, I then washed the dishes. Something I had done countless times, whether in the afternoon or more often at night. Though the time of day didn't matter, as in front of the sink, there was this window. It wasn't an ordinary window using for admiring the view or scenery outside. Its sole purpose was to expel fumes from the kitchen when someone cooked. It stretched the full length of the sink to the drain board, with a built-in exhaust fan just above the handle. You could open the window slightly, but it wouldn't slide all the way down. It could only open halfway before being held back by the hinge. When I peered out, all I could see was darkness, pitch black, apart from my darkened reflection. You wouldn't even know there was an identical window on the opposite side if it weren't for the rare moments when workers opened the ventilation during the day, letting in just enough light to reveal the various windows lining the vertical space from top to bottom. To me, it looked like more of an empty elevator shaft than anything else. But except for elevator doors, it had windows. Well, I guess I'm partially to blame in choosing where I was to live in the building. When I did a quick tour of the vacant spaces, I chose the one with an ominous window instead of an apartment with the kitchen that didn't face a black void. Sure, I could have splurged for a better space with a scenic view, or a better building in general, but that was out of the question. I was on a tight budget, and a good view wasn't exactly a priority standard at that time. That night, when it came time for me to wind down and get ready for bed, I saw from my living room window that it was pouring rain outside. That explained the pitter-pattering I kept hearing as I had dinner, but paid no mind to. I watched the street, empty and desolate, in the dead of night as the heavy rain poured on the pavement in the lifeless road. How the droplets of rain flowed with the direction of the strong winds blowing through the air, the trees swaying its leaves and branches along the gushing winds. It was then made clear to me it wasn't just a heavy rainy night. Outside before me was a storm in place. I felt shaken aback by the sudden alarm that emitted from my phone, the sounds of panicked sirens repeatedly ringing from inside the phone's speaker. As the phone's LED light illuminated my dimly lit features, my brows furrowed as I read the following message. 9:32 p.m. Emergency alert. National Weather Service. A storm surge warning is in effect for Richmond, Virginia. Till 4 a.m. Take action now to protect life and property. Avoid flood-prone areas. I looked out the window once more at the empty, desolate streets. saturated by the storm's relentless rain. The rainwater cascaded down the street, flowing over the pavement in sheets. It was obvious that the storm wasn't going to let up anytime soon. As I lay in bed, the steady rhythm of the rain took on a surprisingly therapeutic quality, offering a strange scent of calm amidst the storm's fury. I felt truly at peace for a moment. The rain's pitter-patter had grown louder compared to earlier, and I barely noticed it. With my head nestled snugly on the pillow, I tried to surrender to sleep, letting the gentle rhythm of the rain lull me into a deep, restorative slumber, enjoying one of the best rests I had in quite some time. Later that week, as early December settled in, my air conditioning started to leak. Well, it had been leaking the morning after the storm. Thus, I had to keep a bucket underneath, and upon testing its functions, I came to a realization that it had broke during the night. Fortunately, winter made the lack of cooling less of an issue, though the building manager had ghosted my text. At some point, black spots began to grow on the grills. Dark, jagged blotches creeping across the metal, resembling ink bleeding through paper. Though I tried cleaning, but it smudged and made more of a nuisance for myself to get rid of it, as it turned the white paint surrounding it dirtier. The unit I rented out wasn't designed to expel heat like some of the others, so I had no problems with the heater, unlike other tenants. However, one problem did remain: the leak. While it wasn't as bad as when the storm first hit, it just persisted. I spoke to the maintenance guy, hoping that bringing it up might speed up the process, but all he told me was that there were delays in repairs. Apparently, I wasn't the only one dealing with water leakage, whilst other units were reporting problems with their heating system. Despite the issues with my apartment not functioning properly, I found myself brushing off those minor inconveniences. Something else had been bothering me entirely. Over the past few days, I felt increasingly unsettled in my own space. For the past few days, I began to experience the same day-to-day occurrences I used to get when I lived with my own family. Extra dishes to clean that I don't recall using, dirt and smudges on the floor I am certain I didn't cause, missing food items from the fridge that I was sure I had just bought. These little signs that made me feel as if somebody else lived with me were subtle at first. I even began to think I was starting to just forget easily. Early dementia? Maybe? Nah, that would have been easier to deal with. What unnerved me the most in the days since the storm were the footsteps I started hearing at night outside my bedroom door. Normally it was quiet, and I'd curl up with a book in the dim, cozy light of my room, or maybe scroll through messages from friends and family. But now, I found myself huddled under the covers, eyes fixed on the thin strip of light beneath the door, where a quick shadow occasionally passed, accompanied by the wet tap of bare feet on the cold floor, resembling water droplets hastily falling onto a half-full bucket. Growing up, I wasn't one to easily believe in ghost stories, but I wasn't a full-blown skeptic either. When faced with something I can't explain, I'm not so dense as to just ignore it and brush it off as unscientific. That part of me is what made it so hard to leave my room at night. It felt ridiculous. Here I was, a grown man who'd been living alone for almost 2 years, struggling to muster the courage to go to the bathroom, because I believed there were ghosts in my apartment. How pathetic. The prospect of moving out was bleak. So whether I was being haunted or not, I couldn't let whatever this was deter me from living normally. Thus, I found my hand gripping on the handle as I unlocked the door, letting the light from the hallway slowly fill up my darkened room. Of course, I saw nothing. I simply let out a sigh of relief and made my way towards the bathroom near my living room. What did I expect upon opening that door? Did I expect a dead ghost from a past century to jump before me before I could take a leak? Walking down the hallway, my gaze was mainly fixed onto the floor, while the warm glow from the lights above washed over the space, it being the only source of light in the entire apartment. Just as my hand hovered over the bathroom light switch, my fingertips grazing the cold plastic, I had paused, right then and there. My gaze shifted beyond the kitchen, towards the window. A light. No, not from inside my apartment, but outside the kitchen window, directly opposite from my own. It shone like a rectangular beacon in the darkness, catching my eye even from where I stood in the hallway, far removed from its source. Taken aback, I shook myself from the brief trance as I had stepped into the bathroom. Even when I tried to rationalize what had occurred, my mind kept circling back to that light. What could it have been? As far as I knew, no one lived in the apartment next to mine. It wasn't even possible somebody had moved in without me noticing, as I would have heard the commotion, so the only option left could be maybe Mr. Grant finally fixed the place up at 2 in the morning. Still, whatever it was, it didn't seem to matter anymore. Exiting the bathroom, I realized that the light was gone. My kitchen was once again cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow from the only light source in the hall. However, just as I walked back to my room, I could have sworn I saw something. A movement in my periphery, the shifts in the shadows, darting behind one furniture to another. The past few days, I'd felt increasingly unnerved. Coming home from classes, I would sometimes overhear my neighbors talking about their issues with the building. I wasn't particularly fond of taking the elevator with others, it just felt awkward. But it was one of those unavoidable aspects of apartment living, unfortunately. One afternoon, I found myself sharing the elevator with Mrs. Callahan and a friend she brought over. They were chatting about work. I wasn't one to eavesdrop when people are only 3 or 4 away and closed in a metallic box with you. It's hard not to catch bits of their conversation. With my phone out, pretending to be disinterested, I couldn't help but overhear Mrs. Callahan discussing the issues she'd been having with her apartment. She mentioned a gas leak she experienced last week. Luckily, it was fixed, but the thought alone was unsettling. I'd heard of a fire in this very building years ago, also caused by a gas leak. It had been ruled an accident, but still, tragedy can linger in people's minds longer than they hope it would. I never learned many of the details, not even where in the building it had happened. But I reassured myself that maintenance now was different from before, hoping, of course, for the better. As I stepped out of the elevator and made my way to my apartment, I noticed Mr. Joubert down the hall, on the opposite side from where I lived. He was a retired veteran from military, Coast Guard, as I recall. He was older, with salt and pepper hair and a gruff exterior that spoke of age. Yet his solid build hinted at strength that he could still take on somebody younger. Despite the years, he looked like he could outmatch a high school football player if it came to it. Mr. Joubert was the only neighbor I regularly spoke with on this floor. On my first day, he'd helped me move furniture into my apartment, most likely out of pity when he saw me struggling to get a couch through the doorway. Occasionally, I catch a glimpse of his daughter, Cindy. She looked about my age, though I was pretty sure she didn't attend the same university as me, given that I'd yet to see her around campus. I greeted Mr. Joubert with a quick nod, and he responded with a curt smile as I headed toward my apartment door. My gaze drifted to my unit, and suddenly the door beside mine came into view, triggering memories of last night. The light from the kitchen window flashed back into my mind. As far as I knew, no one lived in the apartment next to mine. That thought replayed in my head like a broken record since last night. With my key poised to turn the lock, I hesitated, and turned away, striding down the hallway to the other end. "Hey, Mr. Joubert. Sorry to bother. Are you busy?" I asked, my keys finding its way back to my pocket. "Oh, hey, Josh. No, not at all. Just waiting on a delivery," he shrugged, tapping away on his phone, one hand holding it upright while the other did heavily tap on the screen. Something I noticed older people did more often than those younger. "I was wondering if I could ask you something." He hummed in acknowledgement, still focused on his device. "Do you happen to know if anyone's living in the apartment next to mine?" 506? He finally glanced up from his phone, his brow furrowed in a perplexed emotion, as I nodded. "No, son, no one's lived there in years, but you should know that, right?" I scratched my brow, unsure of how to explain last night's strange occurrence without sounding like I'd lost it. The thought of talking about these occurrences going on in my apartment to anyone was silly. Thinking of me rambling about footsteps or random blotches of dirt and murmured whisper sounded stupid to me. It just made me sound as if I was insane. Well, last night when I got up, I saw a light coming from my kitchen window. Looked like it was coming from the window in front of mine, from 506. He stopped tapping on his phone, furrowing his brow further. His expression shifted from confusion to deep thought. As I looked up at him from a shorter angle, I caught a glimpse of the scar on his neck standing out under the hallway light. I remember the time I'd asked him about that scar. He had me babysit his dog, Lady, while he was from home on a day. When he came to pick her up, I invited him for coffee. We had small talk while his white fluff ball of a dog ran around. He wore the same thoughtful expression when I asked, clearly weighing what to say, likely recalling the events that led him to getting the scar. After a moment, once he had gathered his thoughts, he shared a story from his time at sea in the late 80s when he served as a Coast Guard officer. He talked about his duties back then, the long nights on watch, the unpredictable nature of life at sea, what lurked within the unknown, unexplored, where nature had made the decision that no man was destined to see. With a slight pause, he finally spoke the day he got his scar. Commercial fishing boat had radioed in for help to the Coast Guard ship he was stationed in at the time. He and his crew, along with his partner Murphy, who we always referred to by last name, were dispatched to check it out. When their ship neared the boat in distress, he and Murphy deployed into the water to investigate. But something was off. Despite being within close proximity to the boat, they heard no response from the crew the moment they arrived for help. Murphy hopped off the boat first, calling out for fishermen to show themselves. When they got onto the vessel, it was eerily silent, no signs of life anywhere, not even a sound, save for the haunting winds accompanied by the rain with the sway of the sea just no short of distance below them. With all the lights extinguished, the ship had looked as if it was abandoned. Murphy joked that maybe a ghost had radioed in. Mr. Jober didn't really find that funny as he smacked his partner with the back of his hand before the pair proceeded, solely relying on their tactical flashlights. While Murphy entered the wheelhouse, Mr. Jober stayed by the deck, sweeping his light over the area as they both covered ground. A full minute hadn't even gone by before a curdling scream pierced through the radiating ambience. The scream came from inside the wheelhouse, muffled as the scream was barely contained inside the small shed. Mr. Jobert's heart raced as he rushed to check on his partner. He needed not to check inside the wheelhouse as the door opened on its own, with Murphy's body collapsed inside it, causing it to come wide open. Mr. Jobert's flashlight beam fell on his partner's form, and what he saw made his stomach drop. Murphy's chest was filleted open. The bones from his chest ripped out as flesh and blood protruding from deep claw-like gashes. His face was frozen in an expression of horror, his eyes wide and unblinking as they locked onto Mr. Jobert's. With a trembling hand, Murphy clutched his bleeding throat in an effort to stop it from spilling onto the deck, choking on his own blood. His eyes seemed to scream a silent warning, pleading for Mr. Jobert to run. Yet no words escaped, only a sickening gurgle before life drained from his body. Mr. Jobert, frozen, stood in nothing but the shock of his partner's death gripping him. In his eyes, at that moment, everything unfolded in a blur. The man he had spent countless of hours to years with as friends and companions was dead right in front of his eyes. Murphy promised him he'd be there for his wedding. He would be there to see him and Lainey get married. He was barely holding himself together, let alone fully in comprehension of his situation, when in an instant his flashlight illuminated the open door. Something lunged at him with speed void of any human-like attributes. He barely got a good look at whoever or whatever it was before the force had knocked him off balance, causing him to tumble backwards at the railing of the ship, his flashlight slipping from his grasp and clattering uselessly as he fell over to the side of the boat, plunging into the cold open sea. Disoriented, he struggled to make sense of what had just happened. He began to realize he was underwater as his lungs burned for air, while he instinctively kicked towards the surface, but then a chilling realization hit him. Whatever had attacked him had also fallen into the water. Fighting against panic, he swam desperately to break through to the surface. The storm above raged violently, with rain and crashing waves making it near impossible to see. His only thought was to get back to the smaller boat, to escape and reach the safety of the Coast Guard ship. But just as his fingers barely grazed the surface, a cold, scaly grip clamped onto his ankle, the hard, piercing scales scratching his skin. In an instant, he was yanked back down into the depths. Mr. Jobert fought desperately, thrashing against the force pulling him deeper into the dark abyss. With his vision rendered a blur by the water and the panic rising in his chest, he twisted himself around, getting a good look at what had attacked him and his partner, the creature responsible for his death. Through the red haze of anger and rage he felt at that moment, crippling fear latched itself onto him as he bared a sight he would never forget, its terrifying form etched into its mind, haunting him to this day. It wasn't human. Hell, it wasn't even an animal. When Mr. Jobert saw that faithful knight was an unearthly aquatic humanoid. Its body was covered in slick, glistening scales, and its limbs were webbed like a grotesque merging of man and sea. Fins protruded from its spine, starting from the back of its head down to its tailbone. What locked onto Mr. Jobert was its glowing red eyes, bore fully of carnal rage and hunger with an otherworldly intensity. The creature was either entirely feral or pure evil, its gaze cutting through the water, locking onto him. After a moment of thrashing in silence, the creature let out a deafening cry, a sound unlike anything he had ever heard throughout his time at sea. It started as a deep, haunting, whale-like call that had morphed into a glass-shattering shriek that rattled his skull. If it weren't for the fact they were underwater, the piercing echo would have ruptured his eardrums. Mr. Jobert seen what that thing had done to Murphy. He wasn't going to allow it to do the same thing to him next, for his survival, for his fiancée, and for his partner. He was going to survive, even with nothing but the skin of his teeth and the fire under his ass. Summoning the strength he could gather, Mr. Jobert lifted his free ankle and used his hard boot to kick the creature square in the face, feeling the satisfying crunch of his boot against its tough skin. The grip on his ankle loosened as its claws started to spread apart from the tight hold. He wasted no time, kicking himself free once more. His lungs burned for air as he swam to get to the surface, until He caught sight of the dark silhouette of the small boat nearby, the rescue boat he and Murphy had used to reach the ill-fated fishing vessel. Driven by pure survival instinct, he surged upwards, the muffled rain louder as he approached the surface closer. With his heart pounding in his chest and his lungs feeling as if they were going to burst, he aimed for the surface, kicking with all of his might. With a sliver of hope wrapped around him, he felt a sharp grip coil around his shoulders, rough, scaly arms digging into his skin as the creature latched onto him to pull him back down into the depths, its cold body pressing against his back, dragging him down like a relentless predator. Panic surged through him, and his muffled scream was lost in bubbles of water as he nudged and elbowed, struggling to unlatch the thing attaching itself onto him. In abject fury, Mr. Joubert felt as if he was close to his wits' end, feeling his resolve slowly deplete. His fists pounding against the creature's grasp as it clung to him like a drowning parasite, desperate for its host. Its claws latched onto his neck, drawing minimal blood from the piercing grip. The thing was relentless, but Joubert wasn't going down, not without a fight. Desperate from the thrashing and wiggling from its grasp, he had managed to have enough space to turn his body around the moment they faced each other. He plunged his thumbs into the eye sockets of the hideous beast. His fingers pierced the creature's presumed weak spot, feeling the cold, wet tissues wrapping around his thumbs, while deep in its sockets with his nails pressed against the corneas. The monster let out a blood-curdling shriek, so piercing it reverberated through the water. Dark blood clouded the surrounding waters around them, turning the sea into a murky red haze. In its pain, the creature retaliated. Despite its blocked vision, it was still able to do some damage, slashing at the side of Mr. Joubert's neck with its claws and ripping the tender flesh, luckily not enough to sever an artery. The attack sent a sharp sting of pain through him. He let out a pain cry and of agony, but he didn't stop. He just could not afford to. Pulling his thumbs free, he gave one last kick, channeling all the strength to condemning the creature back to the hell it had crawled out of. He used the momentum of the kick to propel himself further up to the surface. The cut on his neck was throbbing and leaking still, but he managed to power through with pure adrenaline. The surface was near, but he dared not look back, focusing on every stroke and kick driven by sheer power and, of course, the will to live. Mr. Joubert safely returned to the Coast Guard ship. Though he was bloodied and shaken, the slash on his neck was a glaring reminder of the near-death experience he had just had. His fellow officers swarmed him with questions. What happened to the boat? Where was Murphy? Hesitant, he'd sounded absolutely nuts. He still told the truth. As unbelievable as it sounded, he detailed everything down to the gash on his neck. He was sure they'd think he was crazy, and that no one would buy the story of an aquatic creature attacking them in the dead of night. But that didn't matter. He knew what he saw, what he encountered, and even if hell decided to open up underneath, he would continue to stand by his account. A team of Coast Guard officers later went back into the fishing vessel to investigate, only to find the obvious. Nothing. No Murphy. No traces of the creature or its existence, and certainly not a single fisherman that supposedly radioed in. The only blaring evidence of something gone horribly wrong in the boat was a trail of blood that led from the wheelhouse and vanished into the water. Of course, when they returned to shore, an official investigation with law enforcement involved was launched. But it led nowhere, as there were no leads, no body to recover, no witnesses beyond Joubert, who is presumed to be a nut job. Though medical and psychological tests proves otherwise, they have no evidence to corroborate his terrifying account. Murphy was officially listed as missing or presumed dead, and despite his death, no one could link it to Mr. Joubert or to anything natural. The story was filed away as an unresolved mystery. But even in the rest of the world had come to move on, Mr. Joubert never did. He believed, though he knew what had happened that night. Whether anyone believed him or not didn't matter. That was his truth. And every time he glanced at the scar on his neck, he was reminded of the horror beneath the waves that had claimed his friend and almost took him as well. But that does sound strange. Look, it might be unlikely, but it also could have been Grant. Seems far-fetched he'd be doing checks or repairs at that hour, but still. Mr. Joubert's voice cut through the haze in my mind, forcing me to shake off the thoughts that had been swirling around. I tried to focus on what he said. I thought the same, I admitted. Mr. Grant's been pretty tied up with lately around the repairs in the building. He hasn't even gotten around to fixing my AC. Mr. Joubert nodded knowingly. Yeah, slow repairs aren't exactly uncommon here. You've been here long enough to know. Even if they're swamped with work, they're always slow to respond. I found myself agreeing, thinking over his words. But before I could form a proper response, the elevator behind us dinged. A man in a delivery uniform stepped out, briefly scanning the hallway until his eyes landed on us. He jogged over, pizza box in hand, confirmed the order with Mr. Joubert as I stepped aside, letting them handle the exchange. Hey, kid, Mr. Joubert said after paying for the pizza. Fancy coming in for a slice? I decided to just order for supper. Cindy said she couldn't make it today, busy with whatever school stuff she's got going on. Sure, I nodded, a chuckled grin. I wouldn't even turn down free pizza. I mean, who would? Even if someone held a gun to my head. When the delivery guy left through the building elevator, I followed Mr. Joubert inside his apartment. It felt cozy, distinct and homey, as I remember it, and it would be there long after I would be gone. I didn't find or feel the strange unease that had plagued over me in my own place lately. Here I could relax and breathe easily, even if it was only for a little while. Days had passed since my talk with Mr. Joubert. Still no sign of Grant. He didn't come to my apartment to check on anything. None of the complaints I'd filed had seemed to even reach him at all. I really wasn't a stickler to get these issues resolved, but if it wasn't for the mold on my AC that worsened to the point of it being unbearable to be around, I wouldn't care at all. It was spreading out. Thick and dark clumps of mold attached itself to the ventilation grills, and oh boy, the smell. It resembled something rotting, putrid enough to turn my stomach. Eating in the living room had been impossible. I spent most of my time holed up in my room just to escape the stench. What really pushed me over the edge was one morning I woke, I found drops of liquid leaking from the vents again, and I heard the familiar sound of liquid tapping on the floor, only this time it was not water. The blackened mold had begun seeping out between the grills in ink-like streaks, as if an octopus erupted from inside the ventilation system. Since I'd been asleep when the leaking had begun, I wasn't able to catch it in time before it even made a bigger mess to clean up. This was a nightmare, scrubbing and mopping for what felt like hours as my arms started to feel restless, doing whatever it could just to get rid of the foul-smelling mess. Frustrated and feeling like I'd reached my limit, I finally picked up the phone and called the maintenance guy. He didn't pick up. With 2 hours left before class, I had enough time to pester him until he answered. Frustrated, I spammed his phone with missed calls, feeling like an obsessive ex. When finally, just as I was rifling through the fridge to find something to pack for lunch, crackling sound echoed from my phone speakers. My attention snapped back to it, sitting on the counter, and I rushed to pick it up. Ugh, what? His voice was groggy, and I could tell he'd just woken up, which only irritated me more. The nerve, like I was the one being a bother, as if I committed the great sin of coming to him and about the repairs he should have done 2 weeks ago. Mr. Grant, I texted you 2 weeks ago about my AC. It's molding at this point. I've had to clean up this disgusting mess. Oh, shit, I'm sorry, kid. He interrupted, sounding more exhausted than anything. Yeah, I got your texts and all the other complaints from everyone else in the building. I haven't gotten to your problem yet because it's not as urgent as some of the other crap I'm dealing with. His voice grew more aggravated as if he was recalling everything at once. Yesterday, that fat bitch, Bertha, from 304 had people raising alarms because her apartment started smelling like a goddamn corpse. I had to call 911 and we busted down her door thinking she dropped dead from a heart attack. Turns out she'd been hoarding dead cats and the smell was seeping through the walls, so excuse me if I haven't gotten around to your AC since the beginning of the month. I couldn't really mutter out much of a response. He could tell I was taken aback by his ranting as he sighed, seemingly out of pity for leaving me speechless at the other line. Okay, how about this? He offered, sounding a little less annoyed. I'll come check it out next week on Monday. Can you stick it out until then? Yes, please, I muttered. Great. He hung up. Sighing, I just shrugged it off, returning to whatever I'd been doing at the time before the call interrupted me. My college classes that day were as mundane as ever, with the usual routine dragging on, although it was a bit more stressful as holidays were approaching and deadlines had to be met. With another semester being nearly over, only one more week until the sweet, temporary release from school due to the winter break. I could practically feel the collective excitement around campus. Students, staff, even professors were looking forward to the break for a chance to head home to their families. Though it was still Thursday after all, and I had a few more classes to power through before the Monday break finally arrived, so feeling comfortable wasn't the best option just yet. I was burning the midnight oil, working on papers that were due the next day when the familiar pang of hunger hit. Leaning back in my chair, I let out a sigh and glanced at the monitor. My eyes skimmed the pages I'd been hammering out for 2 hours. Bulk of it was done, thankfully, but it still needed a final round of revisions and a few touch-ups before I could submit it. My eyes drifted to the bottom right of the screen. 11:44, 16 minutes before the deadline. Quickly double-checked for any glaring errors. Grammar, spelling, all the usual pitfalls that professors would chew you out on, if overseen. Satisfied that it was as polished as it was going to get, I let out a deep sigh. It was time. Drafted an email, attached the file, hit send. The weight of that assignment was finally lifted off my shoulders, as I felt a sigh of relief come out of me. The calming pitter-patter of rain against my bedroom window lulled me into a rare state of peace. With my essay finally behind me, I leaned back into my chair, letting the white noise wash over me. For the first time in a while, my mind felt clear, till a sudden, muffled crash jolted me alert. The distinct clatter of ceramic hitting the floor sent a jolt of unease through me. My eyes shot to the bedroom door, dimly lit by the glow of my desk lamp. Slowly I stood, my heart picking up speed as I moved toward the noise. The creak of my door echoed softly as I stepped out into the hallway, the warm light barely guiding my steps. Made my way to the kitchen, each footfall muted by the quiet of the apartment. My fingertips brushed against the cold plastic of the switch before I flicked it on, and the harsh kitchen light eventually buzzed to life, casting long shadows across the floor. There, I found before me pieces of a plate I had used previously, early in the day. What was once a formed ceramic piece was now reduced to jagged pieces of shattered glass onto the floor. With my brows furrowed, I began to clean. I assumed it had slipped somehow from the counter. I had just washed these, letting them out to dry on the drain board before I could put it back in the cabinet above the counter where I stored my other plates. Sweeping the shards into a neat pile, my eyes drifted to the corner where the plate would have been. Something about it just felt off. The surface was smeared with grime. Dust and debris mingled with smudges of what I looked at to be mud. What stopped me was a medium-sized mark, unmistakably resembling a footprint. I froze, staring at it for a moment longer than necessary. After discarding the broken pieces, I turned my attention to scrubbing the dirt from the counter, the unsettling image of that footprint lingering in the back of my mind. Quite frankly, I would have been more freaked out if it wasn't the first time I'd come across something like this. Just the week before, after coming home late from a dinner with some groupmates after class, I had noticed dirt trailing from the front door to the living room. At the time, I shrugged it off, assuming it was my own doing. Maybe from rushing in and out. But now, with the footprint-shaped mark on the counter, I was sure it hadn't been caused by me, of course, boggling my mind. I knew for certain this time it wasn't me, and I had no idea what to make of it. On my way back to my room, no longer feeling the need to eat, that eerie sensation returned. The same one I had felt the night I hesitantly stepped out of my bedroom. The same night the kitchen window had glared with the unnatural light from the mirroring window next door. Only this time, there was nothing. No light, no unexplained footsteps that I tried to pass off as dripping water. Just silence. I stood frozen for what felt like 5 long minutes, staring into the dim, hollow space of my living room. The shadows twisted unnervingly, and the outlines of my furniture felt uncanny, as if the empty leather seats were watching me, accusing me of being an intruder in my own home. A chill gripped me, creeping up my spine as I saw it. A dark hand emerging from behind the couch, gripping the seat to help itself up further, slowly rising as the smell of rot emitted from the ventilation above, and it became more prominent. My chest tightened, and before I knew it, my eyes stung with tears I hadn't realized were forming. The tension snapped, and I bolted to my room, slamming the door behind me, causing the crucifix attached above the doorway to shake as I flicked the lock with shaking hands. My back pressed against the door, sinking myself to the floor. The gentle, warm glow from the desk lamp was my only comfort, casting a soft light in the room that barely reached the corners. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, hugging myself tightly like a child seeking shelter. My forehead rested against my knees, and for a brief moment I let my body curl in on itself, trying to find peace in the fetal position, hoping to feel safe again. With stray tears trickling down the side of my cheek, I heard the faint sound of a music box, its soft, lilting notes permeating my ears. Hearing the source coming from under the slit of the door, slowly lulling me to sleep. If you stuck through to the very end, thank you. I apologize for any uhs and ers I may have said. This is all a one-take basis. This is a new thing for me, but I greatly appreciate everybody watching. I will probably be uploading again next Saturday. We're kind of going on a Saturday-to-Saturday basis. For kind of a mystery aspect, I have my face cam off for now, just because I think it kind of builds a sort of spooky aspect to storytelling that I found with a lot of creepypasta narrators when I was getting into this kind of stuff. But obviously, if you want a face cam where you think it would match better with the storytelling, feel free to leave a comment. If you want us to read any stories or creepy things that have happened to you guys, feel free to send them to the email. It should be in the YouTube description, but if it's not, it's narrativenightmares23@gmail.com. Just kind of post like the type of story and give me like a general aspect of what happened, like a synopsis, like sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes review before I read it, just so I kind of know what I'm getting into. But once again, thanks for listening, and I'll be back again next week. Stay safe and stay spooky.